Good evening, and welcome to the Hollywood Babylonians. Hello, friends. This is your happy Hollywood history host, Mr. Ben Burke, back today with host of What's in the Boxed podcast, Mr. Graham Bryant, for part 2 of our discussion on John Frankenheimer's 1962 political thriller, The Manchurian Candidate, from United Artists, starring Frank Sinatra, Angela Lansbury, Lawrence Harvey, Janet Leigh, Leslie Parrish, and Henry Silva. Only on the Hollywood Babylonians.
One little thing I want to talk about the dream scene before we move on is Frankenheimer said that he had to, and Lansbury, so many people get shot in this movie. There's so many dead bodies. When Bobby Lindbeck was shot, Frankenheimer realized that he had to do the full force of that bullet at that close range. He had to put ties on the back of the chairs. And when he was shot, then he had to have 10 stagehands immediately pull the chair back as fast as they could.
That got me. That absolutely got me. I forgot about that until you brought it up. I was like, oh, right, that happened.
I'm sorry. And then the blood on Stalin's face. Yeah. And that was just a brilliant idea by Frankenheimer at the last minute. Like after they shot it, it was like, wouldn't the blood fly everywhere? And he was like, how about Stalin's face?
It's crazy, when you think of films from this era, you're like, oh, they were much more reserved because they had certain rules, and then it's like, but look at what they got away with, man. Like that was like I've been desensitized over and over and over again. That still hit me really hard.
I know. Every time somebody dies, it's like, shouldn't there been something in the production code to prohibit all of us from seeing, somebody get shot in the chest through a carton of milk and somebody's brain being blown out and then somebody being strangled to death and then him shooting. Well, okay. And we have to talk about the final scene. In the book, you do not see that final scene. You only hear about that he's killed his mother and his stepfather. In the movie, I think it's so much more impactful that we see that happen.
It's very raw when it happens.
Yes. Iceland is shot, and then Lansbury, she said Frankenheimer came to her and he said, okay, so you're going to get shot and you need to just play that. You get shot and you fall down dead. And Lansbury was like, well, don't you have anything else? He's like, no, not really. So she went to a hunter, somebody, I don't know what you'd call that, but a professional hunter. She's like, okay, so if you were to be shot in the forehead with a hunting rifle, what exactly would happen? And he said, well, your neck would break, your head would snap back, and then that would knock you back, and then the bottom part of your body would fly out. And so she said, so Frankenheimer said, he said, roll him. And she said, and that's what happened. And he was like, that was the best screen fall I've ever seen. So which it was brilliant just for her to do that.
You also have that brief moment of terror where she realizes what just happened. Yes. She looks to the left and then she's gone.
I know.
Absolutely.
She had in the book, she instructs Raymond to shoot the presidential nominee through the forehead. And she has also tied in all of this crystal to the shoulder of Johnny Iceland's jacket. So she says, shoot the presidential nominee through the forehead, and then you shoot Johnny in the shoulder, which would not have hurt him. It would have just hit the crystal and pushed him back. So she staged the entire thing in the book to make it look like it was an assassination attempt on these presidential and the vice presidential nominee.
Would make more sense. Yeah.
Yes. But I think, like you said, I think it's far more effective in the movie that we see the whole thing happen, because what is it? The focus thing on the gun? What is that called?
Yeah. Oh, when he's looking through the scope?
Yes, the scope.
Yeah, when he's looking through the scope of the rifle, right?
Right. When you haven't read the book, you don't know what's going to happen, and that scope is focused on the presidential nominee. And then in just like a split second, not even a second, the scope pans over and blammo. Anyway.
I had some foresight to say, I'm pretty sure the Hays Code wouldn't have us show a presidential candidate being shot in the coming into the film, only briefly knowing what it's about, like the phrase Manchurian Candidate, seen it used in television. I've seen it used in reference to The Winter Soldier, which is a very popular film of the era now. Right. But I had thought it was at the president himself, not the presidential candidate. And so when I learned it was the candidate, not necessarily who was in office, I thought, oh, they might get away with showing this guy getting murdered. But following the whole theme of free will and him being used, I'm like, we're about to see him pull that thing to the right just at the very last minute. And they're just keeping us in suspense.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, when I was 12 years old, I didn't have the foresight to recognize that was probably going to happen. Most adults I watch it with now is like, oh, of course that was going to happen. But at 12 years old, I was like, you know.
So good.
Frankenheimer and the set decorator designed the entire look of Madison Square Garden off of the Democratic National Convention when JFK had been nominated to the presidency. So all of that was designed off of stock footage from that convention, which leads us into the film was released in November of 1962, and it was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Lansbury and Best Editing for Ferris Webster. And then I think Lansbury won the Golden Globe, but she didn't win the Oscar. So, yeah, I know. Who cares?
The Hollywood Foreign Press.
Who cares? So it was released October of 1962, and then Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963.
Yeah.
So
I had thought about that as I was talking. I'm like, wait a minute, doesn't something happen a year after this?
Well, and the term Manchurian candidate in 1959 had not really come into the zeitgeist, the American zeitgeist at that time. The book was published and then the movie came out. So then that kind of came into the zeitgeist. And so then, over a year while the movie was still playing, Kennedy was assassinated. Kennedy was not best friends, but very, very good friends with Sinatra. So Sinatra was one of them that pushed to have the movie pulled from distribution. It really, it was shown off. It wasn't really shown that much in a wide release again until 1988. So it disappeared in November of 1963 because of what happened to Kennedy. And then it reappeared at Sinatra, Frankenheimer's, and Axelrod's urging in 1988. And it was like a rebirth. They re-released it, wide release. So it had kind of a rebirth there. But that a lot of people, it's like, so Kennedy was shot and killed. And then wasn't it the governor of Texas that was with him in the car and their wives?
I'm not actually. I am not brushed up on my grassy knoll history of Dallas that day. I'm a bad Texan. I don't know that much about it.
No, it's okay. But I think the governor of Dallas was with him, and they also shot at him. So then people are like, okay, so was Lee Harvey Oswald a Manchurian candidate, and then was Jack Ruby a Manchurian candidate to put the hit on Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oh my God!
It's a thought that the wife of the governor of Texas put the hit out on JFK through a Manchurian candidate, like happened in the movie.
God.
And then, just a lot of conspiracy theories that pop up like that, which is just absolutely crazy. And when Frankenheimer and Axelrod originally came to United Artists, who distributed and somewhat produced the movie, and they had the heads of United Artists read the book, they said, we don't want to release this. They said because it is anti-Russian, which it's not, anti-Soviet Union.
It's kind of ambiguous over like who it's directly targeting, because it seems like they suggest different groups all at the same time, and it all happened in Korea, so who knows? Yeah,
exactly. Frankenheimer and Sinatra and Axelrod. Sinatra at this time had signed on to the picture. United Artists said, we're afraid we have enough problems as it is with Russia right now. This will probably piss off the president. Like, he doesn't want to have to deal with this. And anyway, people were speculating that JFK was not good at dealing with the Soviet Union, with the communists in general. And that's part of what propagated the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that stuff, which we talked about in Strangelove. But they were afraid that it was going to cause even more conflicts, and they said the president probably will not be for this. And Sinatra, funny enough, because he was good friends with the Kennedys, had just spent a weekend with them at their getaway estate. JFK had asked him, so what are you working on next? He said, oh, I'm going to be in The Manchurian Candidate. And JFK said, oh, I love that book. Who's going to play the mother? So Sinatra went to United Artists. They're like, no, the president wants this movie to be made. So,
okay.
Well, I know. And then he gets shot.
Yeah.
Gosh, so much meta in in one, I can't even
Right.
process all of that.
Unfortunate unfolding of events.
I know, exactly. Oh, one thing I have written down about the ending convention scene before they get to the convention. So they're at the Central Park Zoo, Raymond and Marco in the book. Marco walks Raymond in hypnosis out of the Central Park Zoo. And as they're crossing the street to walk down to Madison Square Gardens, the valet
Right.
hits Marco with a car in an intersection in Times Square. And so Marco, his arm's almost taken off. His face, half of his face is ripped off. So the end of the book, he's having to sit there in anesthesia. They're having to tape him back up. You hear Marco hears through different microphones what's happening outside. You don't see it. I think it's much more effective in the film if you see exactly what happens. But in the movie, Marco saves the day because he cannot figure out. Frankenheimer and Axelrod, when they were in Madison Square Gardens, they were like, how do they figure out, because this place is huge, how do they figure out where Shaw is? Because they know that Shaw is going to shoot the Islands. So Frankenheimer and Axelrod could not figure it out. And finally, Frankenheimer said he turned to Axelrod and he said, Foreign Correspondent. Foreign Correspondent is a 1940 Hitchcock film where with Joel McCrea, and one of our stars from the last movie we talked about, George Sanders, but Joel McCrea has to figure out where the Nazis are. I think in Sweden, in a field of windmills. I haven't seen it in a really long time. All the windmills are turning one way except for one that's turning the opposite way because it's electrically powered by the Nazis, and that's how he figures it out. So Frankenheimer told Axelrod, he said, just think of all of not all of the lights as windmills, and the one light that doesn't go out is the light in the lighting booth where Raymond is, and that's how Marco catches on where Raymond is. So fun little story there of how they figured that out.
Nice. Yeah. I still need to get through like a ton of Hitchcock in my filmography. I think I looked on my letterbox. I'm like, well, I've seen a ton. No, I have not.
Well,
okay.
And I mean, it's easy to say you've seen a lot, and you have seen a lot because he has a lot of like his crown jewels, like Rear Window and Psycho and North by Northwest and The Birds, and you're like, oh, I've seen it all, and then you realize, no, there's a lot from when he was in Britain and throughout the 1940s when he was allied with David O. Selznick.
Man, I haven't even seen Vertigo, and my girlfriend is irate at me that I haven't seen Vertigo yet. Yeah.
It's a visually stunning film. It's very long. It keeps you involved the entire thing. Gabe Lifton is obsessed with Vertigo. And so in the next few months, I'm going to have him on. There's actually a book called Obsessed with Vertigo that is the making of Vertigo that I need to read before we get into that.
You could also talk about Mel Brooks's High Anxiety. If you've seen that one. Yeah,
I have seen
that's
that
got
one.
A lot of it in.
Not a long time. Yeah, but that is... Yeah. Oh, Mel Brooks. Go ahead.
I was just thinking of what was it? The scene where, because I was thinking about my viewing of the film again. We have that very serious scene where he talks about Josie. And he talks about being heartbroken and crestfallen. And immediately after, you have this almost farcical setup of some guy telling a story about telling a guy to play a game of solitaire and then to take a cab to Central Park and jump in the lake.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, so wait a minute. Are we back in comedy mode now?
Right.
That it's like that immediately this circumstance is happening so Frank Sinatra can find out that he's... What activates him? And
exactly. Well, yeah. And if Frank Sinatra hadn't figured that out, then, the ending would have been much different.
The Force Deck scene also I thought was really funny, where it's like he's got like 52 queens in his hand and he's talking, and I'm like, in the future, I will find this a much more endearing scene, but it is very funny right now.
Right.
That he's holding these queens in this guy's face and then making him. And it's like, and now the title card makes sense, how we just focus on a queen the entire time.
Exactly. Yes. It all revolves around the queen. I didn't want to talk about Lawrence Harvey, though. Another little story that I remembered about him is for that scene where he walks into Central Park Lake, according to Frankenheimer and Lansbury, that was the coldest day that they had seen in New York in 30 years, according to meteorologists. So that lake had a foot of ice on it, and the crew had to get bulldozers out there at 5:00 in the morning to start breaking up the ice. And he did that in one take. and they said it was Frankenheimer, the production crew, Sinatra, all watching him. He just walked into the lake. He did not stop. He did not feel the water and go, oh, he just kept walking,
He seems like a guy who would have that level of commitment, though.
Exactly.
Just watching his performance, I'm not surprised at all to hear that he just walked into a freezing lake.
I know, and he was a classically trained actor, and for some at the time were like definitely more of a method actor, what we would consider a method actor now.
Today, yeah.
So, yes. So anyway, and he kind of pulls at your heartstrings because you have no sympathy for him till that scene with the monologue and the scene. You see how much he loves Josie, like when Josie and he get back to the apartment with Sinatra, and you're like, this is finally a real human being. And then it gets all taken away.
Well, and then you have the Eleanor Iceland scene where you realize that he is a brainwashed man who has always been brainwashed and under somebody's command.
Right.
Like his entire life. And then you're like, oh, well, it's sad that he's never escaped this thing. And then you realize he's never escaped this thing because it's all the same. And then him going into the military immediately after breaking up with her and realizing, oh, that's so he can, go get programmed. Got it.
Yes. Well, and that's another thing that I want to talk about real fast. I keep thinking of things to talk about in the book, because, when Eleanor Iceland finds out Raymond's mother in the book, they only call her Raymond's mother, which is they call her Eleanor Iceland once, and then throughout the rest of the book they call her Raymond's mother. That's what what the author does, and it's like, yeah, she is, and she's controlling it anyway. But she tells in the book that Senator Jordan, when she finds out that Raymond is with Josie and that they're madly in love with each other, she writes the letter and she has Raymond sign it and send it to Josie, and then she goes and she has a discussion with Senator Jordan that it's much like the scene that's later, in the party behind the tent. But she goes and she talks to him and she says that her son is gay and that he cannot be with anybody. And you don't know if that's completely true or not. In the book that is reversed through the brainwashing procedure. So, that's even more playing with heteronormativity and breaking down those boundaries of the time. And then he immediately goes to, and it's not ever clear in the book or in the movie when he's chosen to be their assassin, but that she has had some part of it since day one. She's been a part of it since day one. And then he gets the Medal of Honor, which they talk about in the book. This is actually very important in the book. Medal of Honor is the highest honor that you can get in the U.S. military. And he has gotten that, and it is all a ruse and all a scheme. It is just as fake as the Icelands. Yeah,
no, seeing all the generals salute him when he steps off the plane, and I liked the little character they give him of him being absolutely disgusted by it, because which I've heard many friends of mine in the military express a similar sentiment to coming back home to the sound of applause or cheering when you've just gone through all of that.
Right, exactly. And he assassinated so many people. I mean, in war.
Not quite yet, but then they test him on Gaines.
In the
shortly
book,
after.
Yes. In the book, it talks about what an excellent sharp shooter he is in South Korea. So that makes sense that he would be able to hit his mother and stepfather in the Madison Square Gardens arena. And it makes sense why she would trust him with a gun to potentially hit the presidential nominee, even though she's completely undermined in many ways.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of Gaines, the way that they set it up to where you see the assassination scene with Gaines that gets cut off early.
Right.
You don't really feel anything. You might, at least for me, I'm like, okay, I feel a little on edge because he's killing someone who trusts him, but I don't know this guy. I have no feelings for this person at all. But the sequence where he kills Senator Jordan and he just walks in and the senator's overjoyed to see him, and you just know what's coming. And then immediately Josie runs in and gets shot as well, because we heard that directive be given to him as he was being programmed that, if anybody sees what you're doing, you have to kill them too.
Right. Oh no, major plot point. Yes.
Yeah. And so I remember saying out loud, I'm like, oh, he's gonna hate that. But just the way they shot it was so nerve-wracking. And I'm like, I like that they set it up at the beginning where you feel nothing, to have that sense of dread when you see it happen again.
It says in the book that, even though Raymond does not know what he's doing and he can't remember it after it's happened, he's going to. I was gonna say, yeah, there's some part of him that sees and hears and like he's a passenger in his own mind. Yes, and he can't help it. It says he can still feel grief. And it says in the book that after he shot Senator Jordan and Josie, he walks out of the house with an overwhelming sense of grief, but he cannot figure out why he has this overwhelming sense of grief. And you see him in the movie walk down those steps and he's crying after he shot them. He has tears running down his face, which is just, it hits home.
Great acting.
It's great acting. You're going to have to go watch some Lawrence Harvey movies after this.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I loved his performance in this.
Yes. And probably start with Butterfield 8. But with Elizabeth Taylor, I think that's on HBO Max if you have that, actually.
God bless HBO Max while we still have it and Discovery doesn't shut the whole thing down.
Warner Brothers is in cahoots with Discovery Plus now.
The acquisition, yeah.
Right. And Warner Brothers, it's really the Warner Archive. And this is a big deal with me because the Warner Archive owns in association with Ted Turner, the MGM, RKO, and Warner Brothers, their classic library. And so when AT&T bought Warner Brothers, they shut Warner Archive down, all of their film preservation efforts. And Warner Archive, along with Criterion, is like the biggest film preservation company in the United States. So when AT&T shut them down, a lot of people, they figured out quickly they had made a big mistake. Yeah. So that's one thing that I'm also like, I hope Discovery doesn't shut down their film preservation efforts, because they're restoring these movies. They're putting on HBO Max. They're putting them on Blu-ray, and I just listened to a conversation with George Feltenstein, who's the head of Warner Archive, and he's like a major classic film nut, which is perfect because he's the person that's really operating the entire thing. He's Warner Brothers head film historian also, but he said the new man that has stepped in with Discovery Plus, that's the head of the studio, loves film preservation. He loves classic films. He said, I really feel comfortable with him being in the chair when it comes to film preservation, which I'm like, yes.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's some good thought. The majority of it was shot on sound stages that were built on sets. There were some scenes that were shot in New York, Madison Square Gardens. They could not pay all of those extras to fill the entire Madison Square Garden. So a lot of that was stock footage. And then they had to build like their own mini set on a sound stage at the studio.
I was going to say, I love the scene, and I kind of want to make it into a meme of Frank Sinatra's character of Marco saying that every time he was prompted to describe Raymond's character, he said, it's like that I find him a perfectly one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. When deep down in my mind, I know I can't stand the bastard. It's like he's miserable. He's one of the most unlikable people on the planet. And I'm like, is this just every sorority during like recruitment time where they have to be like, they're great, they're wonderful, but I know deep down that I hate them with every fiber of my being.
Yes. Yeah, it is kind of like a sorority, military fraternity, I guess.
Yeah, but with the communist brainwashing, I thought that was really funny, and I like the way that Frank Sinatra delivered that scene and that whole juxtaposition of not knowing how he feels about this guy.
Oh, for sure, and that's the other thing. That other member of the patrol is like the kindest, warmest, most beautiful human being I've ever met. What was it going to? Oh, okay. So in the book, and this is something that they should have kept in the movie, but I guess they couldn't. Raymond goes, okay, so after Marco and Jenny Rose get married, they go on a long honeymoon in the book. Okay. It's written about in the book. And then Raymond goes on a tour of Europe with his mother, Eleanor Iceland. And she coaxes him into it because he's a newspaper man. And she said, I can get you with people that you wouldn't dream of being with in a million years, interview people. So he goes with her on this tour of Europe. And as they're going through Europe, these heads of government or higher ups in government in France and Germany and Italy and the United Kingdom all get assassinated. and they cannot figure out who's assassinating all these people.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so Raymond is a literal killing machine. And then Josie, after they break up, she gets married to a man from South America, and he mysteriously gets assassinated as well right before Josie and Raymond get reunite at that party.
Oh, wow. That's okay. Who the hell is not keeping track of these assassinations in like a very high profile, like a Medal of Honor recipient, a sharpshooter from Korea, visiting all of these countries at the exact same time that these heads of these government heads are being assassinated?
I know, it's great. Well, and then, but it says at the end of the book that the FBI had him on like their top 10 list of suspects that were assassinating these people. Do you have any other thoughts, any other notes? Hot takes?
I had a lot of fun. I thought I was going to be more... I didn't know that I would be more interested in the connections and the influence that Manchurian Candidate had rather than the film itself, but I found the film incredibly engrossing up until that very last scene that they gave Sinatra.
I know.
To like read out all the Medal of Honor recipients, and I'm like, well, okay, but like...
Well, and all of the Medal of Honor recipients, that was straight out of the book that Richard Condon wrote also. That was also straight out of like the military handbook or something. That they felt like they had to put that in there as a post note. But in some ways, I mean, you feel such shock after you know Sinatra has just witnessed Lawrence Harvey shooting himself. You could have just left off with that. And, you know, people would have been disgusted at the time. I think they would have been mortified, honestly. Yeah. But at the same time, you would have had such a more of an impactful ending. He
just says, "Oh, God," and like crumbles, and then it says the end. And I'm just like, oh, okay. That's all right. Fine.
Underwhelming compared to what you just watched happen.
I thought it was a really... I had rated the film about an 8 out of 10. I thought it was really well done. I was surprised, and I found it refreshing how it wasn't afraid to play with tonality or surrealism in certain scenes. Like, I thought that the out of focus scene during the deprogramming moment, I thought that the out of focus shot was purposeful because it fell in tune with the rest of the film and what they were doing. And I choose to believe it actually does enhance the context of what's happening in the story.
Right.
And yeah, Angela Lansbury absolutely killed it. And it's crazy. When I was looking at her filmography, I'm like, it's crazy how like the notable roles that she has now are like Beauty and the Beast, when she has done, you know, performances like this, and that it just seemed to not... I still don't have a full understanding of the studio system and how Reputation worked at the time, because I'm like, well, if you did a good thing, wouldn't you get more work? I don't know.
I don't
know what happens.
Well, and she was typecast in kind of roles like that, secondary B characters. And she was never known as like big glamour girl like other actresses were. But this is my favorite performance of her on film. By far.
I can see why. Yeah, it's so good. Has there been anything notable? We haven't talked about the Denzel remake. I don't know anything about it. I haven't seen it.
Oh, I haven't seen it either.
No, but I was going to ask, like, is there anything from pop culture that you see that came from this film that, like, when you look at it, it reminds you of when you were a kid and you watched this movie a lot?
Not exactly. What about you?
As I was watching the movie, there's an episode of some show that I watched where they literally use the phrase Manchurian Candidate to describe the exact circumstances that they're in right now. And it's like the premise of it is the ghost of Abraham Lincoln is trying to prevent the president from being assassinated in the White House because he hasn't gotten...
seen this show.
Have you seen the Venture Brothers? Do you know what I'm talking about?
It sounds very familiar.
There's an episode where it's like Abraham Lincoln is trying to get his wings. Apparently his ghost is stuck in the White House in the Lincoln bedroom, like his whole afterlife. And he's like, but if I save the president from being assassinated like I did, then maybe I can get my wings and I can go on. And then I'm like, this is so... And like even the character that's being framed as the being framed as the kind of Shaw figure is very puritanical and has mother issues and seems very similar to the character. So as I was watching the film, it unlocked that memory in my mind of, they're literally just doing a one-to-one transition from the film Manchurian Candidate, not just the premise, but like the characters as well. And it was very silly, but like that was my warm memory as I was watching the film. It was like, this thing from my childhood now makes sense.
Well, that's awesome. Well, yes. And I think, I don't know, because it disappeared from the zeitgeist from 62 to 88 because of, or 63 to 88.
Yeah, because of assassinations and whatnot. And,
right, exactly. And then it just kept getting worse. I know for me, it's like the more I study Hollywood history, the more I look at films, it's like the cultural zeitgeist at the time. This and Dr. Strangelove, there's another movie called Failsafe. Political thrillers like this were growing and growing and growing. And there's always that same kind of line of Manchurian Candidate, nuclear war, Russian Soviet spies that was all kind of tying them together.
Insurgency within the United States government. And,
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like people today, listeners would probably know Captain America: The Winter Soldier as a very much inspired by the Manchurian Candidate film, because you have reprogramming soldiers and conspiracies within the government and activation and stuff like that going on, which also fantastic film. But
and that's why I have you here, so you can remind me of stuff like that, because I've seen The Winter Soldier and I totally realize that now, but that wouldn't be something I think about because I'm so stuck 100 years ago. I'm basically 100 years old.
We need it though, because like I need to like have I need to have my my rundown on Hollywood gossip and the way that all these politics work and still carry on to today. Oh,
for sure. Yeah. And it's amazing how some of them have not gone away. But, like people trying to call out that kind of toxic behavior now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is good that we have that. Graham, I have had an amazing and a marvelous time talking with you today.
Absolutely.
Yes. And hopefully back on sometime in the future. I'm figuring out now, sometimes it takes up to a month for me to research and edit and everything, all of that.
We're not regular at all. Like our show isn't regular at all either. We have life stuff get in the way, and then we figure out when we can fit it into our schedule and hang out.
Right. I mean, if somebody was paying me like $20 or $30 an hour, heck yeah, I'd be doing this all day long.
Wouldn't that be the dream?
But we'll get there. We'll keep working as hard as we can. But I had such a fantastic time, and we'll get back together. We'll talk about Night of the Hunter. We'll talk about Harvey. We'll have to talk about Wait Until Dark, because that is another ending that makes me pee my pants.
I did that one in high school. I was on stage for that one, and so I have a lot of personal emotions attached to that story in that film.
Graham, I enjoyed it so much today. Thank you so much for being on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, we had a blast, and we'll get you back on shortly to talk about other movies. So if you liked what you heard today and you'd like to suggest a movie for us to talk about, write in to the HollywoodBabylonians@gmail.com. I'm so sorry. That's a very long email address. I didn't think about that before I wrote it out. So email us at that. Tell us what movie you want us to talk about, why you love it, why you think we should talk about it. If you listened to our conversation today and there was a topic that you'd like to add conversation to, or you weren't completely sure that was correct, what we were talking about, feel free to write in to us at the HollywoodBabylonians@gmail.com, and we might read your letter on the air. Wouldn't that be exciting? Ooh, yes, exciting stuff. And follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at the Hollywood Babylonians for more Hollywood Babylonians content. Be sure to cinematically scintillate and go out and watch a new classic film. Until next time, this is
Graham Bryant
and Ben Burke. Thank you for listening to the Hollywood Babylonians.
You have been listening to The Hollywood Babylonians. The Hollywood Babylonians is produced, edited, and hosted by Ben Burke and co-hosted by Graham Bryant. Audio engineering by Andrew Davis with artwork by Ben Burke and Jamie Lee. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Hollywood Babylonians for more Hollywood Babylonians content. Thank you for listening and have a good night.